And this is Nicaragua. I started going to war zones in 1986. I'd made a lot of tough documentaries in Australia about the way Aboriginals are treated and felt that I could start working with war. And that's where I met the Sandinista women poets, and Ernesto Cardenal, and they said that anything in life can be art, everything is incredible. It's a poetic movement called externalism, and that's what brought me back to doing realist paintings. There I am. So you can now download it. All of our films are on SBS On Demand. So this is Bullets of the Poets. It's the first time Helen ever heard about me. She was just a young girl and went to see the cinema, I think, was it in Wollongong, Helen? Valhalla and Glebe. She saw Bullets of the Poets, and that was our first contact. This is the worst experience of my life. The photo on the right is a couple of 100,000 people alive, and the one on the left is a couple of 100,000 people dead. And I lived through those 4 days, and the worst 4 days of my life. That's when that kind of thing is happening, people lose their dignity. And I went to have a piss in the shitter, which is just a hole in the ground, and looked down at the hole, and here's this woman looking up at me, and she spent the night holding her 2 babies above, you know, the shit and the urine and stuff in the shitter. And I was doing a radio interview, a TV interview with Steve Liebman, and he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I've just been having a piss," and I think he was ready to put his finger on the button, you know, this is not going to go well. I don't know if the ABC actually ran our spa thing today, the same thing may have happened today. She'd hidden in the shit and the piss all night to save her babies, and we got her out. People lose their dignity. I realised what it was like to be in a concentration camp and hide, you know, in the roof or something to avoid the gas chambers. People were terrified. And here was this preacher who was reading to people from the Bible. And I came up to him and I said, "Oh, do you think if I stayed here you mightn't get killed?" And she said, "Are you crazy, George? They want to kill you. You've got the evidence, you know." And actually, my photos were used to have them indicted as war criminals. And he gave me 4 kids to try and, whose parents had been killed, to try and get out. I got them out. When I got the kids out and I came back, the preacher was dead. But the bravest man I've ever met. That's true courage. And wondering, when you're in a situation like that with soldiers, the Australian soldiers all got the highest medals that you can get in Australia. If they saw me drawing or just taking photographs, they'd think I was an inhuman monster. So I helped save babies. Paul Jordan and Jonathan Church and I got 154 babies onto trucks and got them out to a Mother Teresa orphanage. And at one point I was exhausted and I saw this girl, Immaculée, and she'd been chopped through the skull, and I could see she was in a lot of pain, and I said to Carol, the doctor, "Give me some morphine for her." And she said, "No, George, she's going to die. Just go and, I can't waste the morphine, just go over and be with her." And as I drew her, she said, "Why are you drawing me?" And I said, "I want the world to see what was done to you." And her life was flickering in and out like a light bulb that's on the blink, like a fluoro bulb that's flickering. But she stayed with me until I'd finished it, and I showed it to her, and she said, "Oh, but I'm beautiful, I don't look like that," you know. And I'd spent those moments with her. And that's on the cover of one of the monographs on my work, and the paintings that I've done of Immaculée have gone all over the world. And so I lived up to my deal. Now there's Jonathan Church. Jonathan and Paul Jordan and I, the UN told us not to collect babies because it was Africa, just let them die. And we went out and collected all these babies. And I became very close to Jonathan. At one point, the bad guys were trying to kill us because we shamed them. And Jonathan disappeared for a minute, and when he came back he was very nervous, and because they told us we couldn't collect any more babies. And I couldn't understand why he'd stopped talking to me. And finally, when we got to a safe place, he bent down on a knee and he pulled his medical bag out open and he put a baby in the medical bag. So naturally he was terrified that the baby would have suffocated, and he saved it. And sadly, he was killed in the Black Hawk crash. And so I'm presently doing a portrait of him for the War Memorial. And this is early stage in the portrait. And I just got an email this morning from Paul Jordan, who was his mate, three of us were doing it together, and he said, it's so moving, George, so much emotion. And the truth was that these guys were Special Forces soldiers, but their tear glands were working overtime. The whole time they were working, they were holding back tears. And so the challenge of this painting is to show that this big, brave Special Forces man is fighting back tears as he saves children. This is Abu Ghraib. I was in Baghdad, Iraq, while Saddam was in power. Australia stupidly followed America into a war that should never have happened, that was just regime change. And the day that Saddam left the city, this is before the Americans came in, it was like Elvis has left the building. Everyone had the sense that he'd gone. And the relatives of people who were at Abu Ghraib prison broke in, and I was there with them, helping them smash down the gates. But when they got to the gallows, they were all worried that their loved ones would have been killed just as Saddam was leaving. And sadly, that turned out to be the case. They got me to go into the gallows, beautifully designed by the Germans, by the way. Go into the gallows and see if there are any landmines or booby traps. I've been trained to find these things, and it was clear. And when they got in, they felt that their loved ones were on the list and they had all been killed. And I discovered something about the executioner's art, something's ancient. On the noose, they put tissues around the noose so that the victim doesn't feel the roughness of the noose is the last thing they remember while they're alive. And so naturally, when the noose pulls, tissue and sweat perspiration ends up in the tissues. And the relatives didn't know where the bodies were, and they said, George, do you think we can take the nooses and bury them? We have to bury something. And they knew what noose belonged to what relative. And I said, yes. And then as they were turning away, they turned back to me and they said, George, only if the Americans close this place and end this reign of terror, it will have all been, we'll have seen our city destroyed, and it will have been worth it. And of course, you've all seen the horrific pictures of what the Americans did at Abu Ghraib. They expanded it. You've seen the human pyramids of naked men, the dogs snarling with women holding them on leashes, at prisoners. And that's when America lost the war and lost the hearts and minds of the Iraqi people. And here I am with Julian Assange. I think the bravest man Australia's ever produced, our true Ned Kelly. I've said in the media that I would take a bullet for him. And recently I went and did his portrait in the embassy in, there we are together, in Ecuador Embassy. And what Julian represents to me is that in a world where, we can't stop the CIA and everyone looking at our telephones, reading our emails, we're just, all of us are victims of a new age which has happened too quickly. In the past, you used to have to get an order from a judge for the police to open your mail, but now they know everything about us. They can follow into us. They could have been listening to Helen and I in our tub this morning if I had my computer open. And Julian has shown how one man can stand up and bite them on the arse. And recently, when he released a lot of information about CIA bugging of telephones and everything else, the director of the CIA said as if, oh, please protect us from Julian Assange, he's damaging our ability to function. My God, one little man with just one supporter, he's just only got one helper in that embassy, and he's actually putting a bomb under the CIA. God bless him. There's Helen with Julian. And there I am working on the portrait. There it is. And then I did a second one in Jalalabad. And Julian wanted me to do that because he came into the world making, that's a Jalalabad one, showing the footage of American soldiers brutally killing people from a helicopter, including journalists in Iraq. It's called Collateral Murder. And CIA, of course, told the bad guys that we were in Jalalabad, and we'd just been with Julian. So here I am up on the roof of the Yellow House doing this giant portrait of Julian, and with American attack helicopters hovering above us, taking photographs. So it was perfect, you know, talking about conceptual art. And then I took it through the streets of Jalalabad and everyone cheered.